All right. Hello, guys. So before we move on to the next SQL queries, I want to talk about something important that are SQL keys. So on my screen, as you can already see that there are four keys that we can see. First, we have the primary key, then we have the candidate key, then we have the super key, and then we have the foreign key, right? So we are going to talk about each and every key and why do we actually use the key, right? So that's all we are going to discuss in this video. So let's start with the primary key first. So I will go to the primary key sheet. And in here, what is a primary key? A primary key is a column or columns that contains values that uniquely identify each row in a table, right? The primary key is nothing but a column or a set of columns that uniquely define or uniquely identify each row in a table. Okay. Now, from the beginning, we are working on this customer data that we got from the W3 schools, right? So in here, what I can see is customer ID. I have called it the primary key. Now, why did I call it a primary key? Is because if you see in here, you will see that all the values are unique here. That means if I talk about this customer ID 1, that means this one, that means Alfred's is only appearing once in the data. That means this one is uniquely identifying this row, right? And similar to 1, we have this 2 that is uniquely identifying this row. So as you will see that each and every row is identified by a unique column, that is our customer key. So in here, how many unique values do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have 5 unique values. Okay. Now, if my values were like this, so if my customer ID was something like this, right? So let's say I have 5 or let's say 4, 4, 4. Okay. And if my column was like this, we couldn't have called it the primary key because it is not unique and it is not uniquely identifying each and every row. That means this 4 is identifying these rows and this 4s are identifying three different rows, right? So this is all about the primary key, right? So primary key, just remember it is a column or a set of columns that uniquely identify each and every row in a table. Okay, that means a primary key. Let me write it down as well. Okay, here, so I'm going to write it down. The primary key should always be unique in nature, right? So primary key should always be unique. It cannot have duplicate values. Like this one cannot be duplicated. Okay. So that is all about the primary key. And we will see how we can, I mean, why we are learning this and where we will implement this concept, right? We will see that in our later part, right? So let's now go to the candidate key. Now, what is a candidate key? So as you can see here in this data, I have added one more column. Okay. So let's say along with the customer ID, along with each of the customers, we have the Aadhaar information of those customers as well. Okay. Now, Aadhaar ID is something that is unique. Okay. That is a unique identifier for each and every individual in a country. Okay. Now, if I talk about this Aadhaar ID, okay, and if I talk about the customer ID, so customer ID in our previous sheet, we have seen that the customer ID is our primary key. Okay, now this Aadhaar ID is also uniquely identifying each and every row, right? So since we are calling this as a primary key, we cannot call this one as our primary key as well. So we call it something like the candidate key. And if you want, you can try to read this definition as well. The column or columns that contains value that uniquely identify each row in a table. So it's the same as primary key, right? It's just like primary key, but it's not a primary key. Okay, so primary key is something that is our customer ID. Okay, and you will know why customer ID is a primary key and not the other way around, right? You will learn that as well. So as of now, just know that this customer ID, we have considered it as our primary key and the candidate key is our Aadhaar ID. That means the Aadhaar ID is also uniquely identifying each and every row in the data. Okay. And you will see that there are no duplicate records over here. Okay. Now let's move on to the super key. Now there is something called super key as well. Okay. So super key is something, it's a combination of two or more columns. Okay. So when you combine two or more columns, it becomes a super key. Okay, and the super key should also not contain any duplicate values. Okay, so let's say if I take this example, so here as you can see I have pointed out to two columns. Okay, one is the customer ID and one is the customer name, right? But if you understand this properly, customer name can be duplicated, right? There can be two Alfreds, there can be let's say there can be two Antonio as well, right? But this ID is something that will be unique. Okay, so if I create a column and if I combine these two columns, so let me try to do that. So we have the customer ID. I'm not going to write it, and then since I'm combining them, I can put a comma, or maybe I can put an underscore. You can put anything, okay? Or maybe you can put a space, okay? So I will just go with the comma, and then I'm going to take the customer name, okay? So now what I have done in this column is I have combined this two. Okay. Now, if I combine this two, I will have to combine these two values as well, right? So if I try to combine it, so in Excel, there is a concat function. Okay. You don't have to write concat function. I'm just showing you just to understand. Okay. So I will just try to concat it by what? I will try to concat it by a comma. So I will put the comma inside the double quotation, and then I will put this. So if I just do this, okay, and here you will see and let me try to draw the borders as well. So here you will see that this customer ID and customer name, you will see that 1 comma Alfreds, okay, and that becomes one column, and you will see that all these values are unique as well. Okay, so super key is a set of columns that can uniquely identify each row in a table. Okay, so since till now we have talked about primary key, candidate key, and super key, and you will see that all of these keys can only be unique. It cannot contain any duplicate value. Okay, so this is a really important point to remember, that primary key, candidate key, and super key, they are, I mean, almost similar in nature, but they can play a very different role. Okay, and we will understand how they are playing different roles, right? So super key, again, super key is something that is a combination of two columns. Okay, when we combine two columns and we try to create a unique ID, let's say, okay, that becomes our super key. Now let's talk about the foreign key. This is something that is the most important concept, because this is where all this primary key, candidate key, and super key, they all come together and they work as a same. Okay. So so what is foreign key? First of all, let's understand that. So a foreign key is nothing but to establish relationship between two data. Okay. So if you remember, we had these two tables, right? One is the customer data, and another one was the order data that we were working on in SQL. Okay. Now, if you see how these two data are related to each other, okay, if you try to consider that, so these two data are related by customer ID, and we have, when we perform the join operation, different kinds of join operation, what we did was we took the customer ID as our common column, right? Because we have only the customer ID as the common key. Okay. Now, what we are doing is using this foreign key. What we are doing is we are trying to establish a relationship. That means a customer can only place an order, right? So nobody else is going to place an order. So only our customers can place a order, right? So now, now, which one is a foreign key? So we have in the customer data. So this is, let me just write it down over here. So this is our customer data, right? This is our customer data, and in here we have our order data. Okay, let me try to write it down as well. So this is our order data. Okay, now how these two tables are related? If I say that one customer can place many orders, right? So that means there is a relationship. Okay, and orders can only be placed by customers only. Only my customers can order, right? So these two tables certainly has a relationship. Now, the relationship that we have is identified by the customer ID. Okay, so customer ID is what? Customer ID is a primary key that we have already seen. Customer ID is a primary key for the customer data. Customer ID is a primary key for the customer data. And when we are saying, when we are putting the customer ID in the order data, it becomes the foreign key of order data. Okay, so a customer ID is the primary key of the customer data, and in the order data, the customer ID is the foreign key, because since it's coming from the other table, okay. So when somebody comes from the other country, we call them foreigner, right? So you can try to understand it like that. Okay, so when a key is coming from a different table, we call them as foreign keys. Okay. Now in one table there can be multiple foreign keys. Okay, there can be multiple foreign keys. So if you look at the order data, which one do you think is our primary key in the order data? So in the order data, as I can see, order ID is the primary key, because this is something that is uniquely identifying all the rows in the table. Okay, now how many foreign keys do we see? So first we have the customer ID as a foreign key, then we have the employee ID. Let me try to highlight it. So we have the employee ID as our as our foreign key, and then we have the shipper ID as well as our foreign key. Because why are we calling them as foreign key? Because if you see, first of all, this is not an employee data, this is a order data. And in the order data, if we have the employee information, if we have the employee ID, if we have the shipper ID, that means it's coming from some other table, right? So in order data, or in, let's say, if order is a country, okay, so in order country, if employees are coming, okay, that means that employee ID is a foreigner. Okay, and in that way, employee ID, shipper ID, and customer ID, all of them becomes the foreign key for this data. So I hope you understood this concept, and this is really important. If you haven't understood it yet, please let me know in the comment section, and also try to watch this video again if you don't understand it. And you can also try to take some help from chat gpt, or you can try to take some help from google as well, because this is the most important concept if we are talking about sql, if we are talking about dealing with the data, right? So that's it for this video. See you in the next lecture.